Basil the Great today so that we can start, St. Maximus the Confessor, start on the Cosmic Mysteries of Christ on Thursday and continue over into Tuesday of next week. Because I think I am going to drop the St. John of Damascus on the holy images. I'll talk about it kind of briefly, but it is pretty long, and we are running a little bit out of time. More than likely, we will not have class on May the 24th, because that's my wife's next chemo.
May?
Sorry, April 24th. And she does need me to drive her and stuff, because it's a little more than what she expected. Okay, so I think where I left off the other day was on page 42. We had just talked about where Basil the Great talks about what the passage in Genesis about grow and multiply and fill the earth means. And he says it doesn't mean literally fill the earth with human beings, because then you'd have overpopulation and everything. He says it means what? Dominate the earth by authority. Now, he does not mean by that rape, plunder, and pillage the earth. Okay, this isn't a clarion call, to think of the worst companies there are in the world to destroy the planet. That's not what he means. He means to put the imprint, as it were, of authority on the world. Because humanity is made in the image of God. This is a way for humanity to, I'll step out on a limb here, figure forth God in the world, okay? And then he's going to go on, and on page 43 in section 15, he quotes Genesis again, and God made the human being according to the image of God he made him. And then he says the plan had two parts, according to the image and according to the likeness. And we just began to address this last Thursday. So he says, well, maybe that's just saying the same thing. Maybe according to the image, or in the image and according to the likeness, is merely redundant. All right? So he says, perhaps it is saying the same thing. Let us make the human according to our image and likeness. Yet to say according to the image is not to say according to the likeness. So whichever we choose, he says, we would be rejecting what has been written. That is, if we take one of these approaches, then we have to reject partially what has been there or what has been written. For if it says the same, it is perverse to say the same things twice. And and it's kind of interesting because God seldom repeats himself. For example, in Scripture. Okay? He doesn't keep coming back and saying the same thing over and over again when it's this kind of passage. Now, he does say some things over and over again, like, come back to me, you wayward Jews. I mean, he's repeatedly calling the Israelites back to himself because they're repeatedly falling away. So, he goes on and says, well, I don't really think it's that. And he says, but then also there's not any wasted words in Scripture. No idle words, he says. Okay? So, why has it not been said, and God made the human being according to the image of God and according to the likeness? Was the Creator exhausted? This is impious. That's to denigrate the very idea of what God is. Did the one giving the order change his purpose? That is, did God change his mind? That thought is even more impious. Did he speak and change his plan? That's ridiculous. So, here's what Basil finally says the passage means. By our creation, we have the first, that is, we have the image of God. And by our free choice, we build the second. That is, the likeness of God. Okay? So, what Athanasius called the grace given at creation, being made in the image of God. That's something everybody, according to Basil and Athanasius, is born with. All right? The likeness of God is entirely dependent upon how one lives one's life. So, he says, in our initial structure, co-originates and exists are coming into being according to the image of God. By free choice, we are conformed to that which is according to the likeness of God. By our free choice, by our choosing one thing over something else, we grow more and more into the likeness of God. So, and this is what is according to free choice. The power exists in us, but we bring it about by our activity. That is, the power. What power? The power to grow into the likeness of God. Okay? It's like an acorn. If the acorn is never watered, if the acorn is never put in soil, will the acorn ever grow into an oak tree? No. So it has to be nurtured. It has to be nourished. He's saying the likeness of God, that power to become that, is in us, but it has to be properly nourished. So, now he has made us with the power to become like God. I'm skipping one long sentence. And in giving us the power to become like God, he let us be artisans of the likeness to God. That is, we become the artists. Why? So that the reward for the work should be ours. In other words, could God make humanity into his own likeness? Obviously, yes. God, by the very definition of godness, can do whatever God wants. Okay? But what benefit would that be for humanity? That was, what would humanity receive from that, and what would humanity learn from that? Nothing. Humanity would be nothing more than the raw materials of this chair, simply to be molded and shaped. Okay? Humanity would never be able to say, as this chair, I would like arms, because it would have no choice in the matter. Okay? So, thus, we would not be like images made by a painter. The Mona Lisa did not get to tell Da Vinci, I think you need a little bit more brown there. The Mona Lisa was inert. So, we would not be like images made by a painter, lying inertly, lest our likeness should bring praise to another, that is, the artist, the painter. For when you see an image exactly shaped like the prototype, you do not praise the image. You praise the maker of the image. And you've all seen, paintings, or especially, there's a lot of this kind of stuff on the internet, where you look at a painting and you're like, it looks like a photograph. And you get up really, really close to it, and you can see then the brush strokes. Okay? Are you praising the painting? Yes. But what are you really doing? You're praising the skill of the artist behind the painting, who can make that thing so lifelike. So, accordingly, so that the marvel may become mine and not another's, he has left it to me to become according to the likeness of God. For I have that which is according to the image, what? In being a rational being. That's the image of God, being rational. Okay? But it's being a rational being, physical existence. See, all of these writers that we're reading, and then later on, most of them will assert the angelic orders are not made in the image of God. Why? They are pure intellect, pure mind. They don't have being, okay, physicality as such. We do. Okay? So, I have that which is according to the image in being a rational being, but I become according to the likeness. And he throws a little change. How? In becoming Christian. Why in becoming Christian? Okay. Why does the book of Acts say that it was in Antioch that the first Christians were called Christian? What comes before that part that says where blank were first called Christians? Followers of Christ. Okay? So, followers of Christ, he says, are those who, and I'll throw in an ought or should, be those becoming like God. Well, how do you become like God? Become like Christ. Well, why? Because he is God. Okay? Now this will really blow your mind. So what does that mean then, to become like Christ? How does Christ show his divinity? Raising the dead? Making the lame walk or the blind see? No, it's hanging on the cross. Okay? Greater love hath no man than this, than that he's willing to lay down his life for a friend. Okay? So, notice what he immediately follows that line with. But I become according to the likeness in becoming Christian. Become perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That's what becoming a Christian is really all about. Okay? Do you see how the Lord restores to us that which is according to the likeness? If you become, skipping that passage from Matthew, if you become a hater of evil, free of rancor, not remembering yesterday's enmity, or not remembering yesterday when somebody slighted you, not remembering yesterday when somebody cut you off on the highway, not remembering yesterday when somebody took your parking spot, not remembering if you become brother loving and compassionate, you are like God. Notice what he's saying. Becoming made according to the likeness of God is not some great, huge moral leap. What does that really mean? On a, the phrase I used to Caroline earlier, you're not a philosopher. You've got children. You're down to earth. What does that mean in a very down to earth way? Humble? Okay, that's kind of more of a concept still.
Grounded in this world, having sentimentalities for things of this world.
Okay, sentimentalities for things of this world, like, this. I really like this, or, this, or this. I went someplace yesterday and she goes, oh, you had such nice hair. I was like, well, c'est la vie, that's life. What's he mean? Look at that passage again. If you become brother loving and compassionate, you are like God. What does it mean to become brother loving and compassionate? Who's your brother? Bingo. Everyone. So what does it mean to be compassionate to everyone? On a real down-to-earth, everyday level. Somebody cut you off. You immediately have a choice. You immediately have an opportunity to respond. What can you do? You can respond in a whole variety of ways. You can flip them off. You can swear at them. You can lay on your horn. Or what else can you do? Let it go. You can sing the song from Frozen, You can let it go. Okay? You can not respond. See, our society kind of tends to say, when somebody does something to you, you respond. You react. Okay? Or you don't. Somebody does something that you don't like. You always have a choice. You can respond with anger, or you can not respond at all. Okay? That not responding at all, that's becoming like God. What else can you do? You're driving around, you're walking around somewhere, you're getting on almost any of the on-ramps onto Interstate 24. And what can you now see every day in Murfreesboro that you didn't see 5 years ago?
Traffic.
Okay, what else though? Somebody standing there holding a sign. Hungry, out of work, family to feed. You have a choice. Okay? You can zip on along, and it might not be physically possible to stop without getting rear-ended. Okay? Or, what's another choice? If you have $5, you can stop and give them $5. Okay? That's a choice. Okay? That's what he's talking about. That's compassionate. Okay? So, if you forgive your enemy from your heart, you are like God. If as God is toward you, the sinner, you become the same toward the brother who has wronged you, by your goodwill from your heart toward your neighbor, you are like God. Okay, look at that again. If as God is toward you, the sinner, Paul says that yet while we were in our sins, Christ died for us. Okay? Caroline.
Is there a difference between forgiving and not being a fool? As far as if somebody really wronged you? I mean, where does that come in? Are we just really literally supposed to turn the cheek every time?
Yes.
So,
That's what every one of these writers will say. You literally turn the cheek every time. Does that mean that you necessarily put yourself in situations to be abused? No. I mean, let's use a real example. If you're in an abusive relationship, it doesn't mean you literally, every moment, forgive the person and stay in that situation. No. Christ would say, or these writers would say, you do forgive, but what else? You get out of there. Okay? You don't allow yourself to merely be a punching bag for somebody else. Okay? Similarly, if it's not an abusive relationship in that sense, but you have a quote-unquote friend who is constantly haranguing or sarcastic, etc., well, then a little bit of common sense would say, is this person really a friend? To no longer be a friend with somebody is quote-unquote not a sin. To want somebody out of your life is not a sin. It would be a sin if you wanted them out of your life and dead. If you wanted them out of your life and something bad to happen to them. Okay, that would be. So,
kind of like what Jesus did when he gave up on the Jewish people as far as the message, because he originally came to them and he wouldn't give.
yeah.
Okay, so not that he stopped loving them.
Exactly.
It's just, okay.
Exactly. Or another example, Paul. Paul stops preaching to the Jews. Why? Because they won't listen to him. And he says, it's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm going to take the gospel elsewhere. Okay? So, you come to be, according to the likeness, what? By undertaking kindness. And kindness, he really means kindness, gentleness to others. What does that imply? Let me take that back. What do I often assume about other people? That they're not nice, that they're rotten, that they're out for themselves. Okay? What he's suggesting here is changing that mentality and assuming rather than the worst of people, maybe try assuming the best of people. Okay? Take on yourself a heart of compassion, kindness. Why? That you may put on Christ. If you take upon yourself a heart of compassion and kindness, he is saying then you are putting on Christ. Because what does he do? He dies. For what? Not his friends, his enemies. He dies for his enemies. While we were yet in bondage to sin, why can I not say that? While we were yet enemies, he died, Paul says. For through those things by which you undertake sympathy, and keep in mind, what does that word sympathy mean? It doesn't mean feeling bad for somebody else. Sim means together. Pathy means emotion, feeling. It means you are suffering with someone else. Okay? So, for through those things by which you undertake sympathy, you put on Christ. And drawing near to him is drawing near to God. But he doesn't mean near in a proximity kind of way. What does he mean by near? Think of the image you'll see all over the place. You'll see it on the internet, you'll see it on signs, etc., of, kind of the progression of humanity. Starting off as an ape, or sometimes starting off, like a fish or an amoeba or something, and it gradually grows, and then it's an ape, and then it rises up on two legs, and it keeps walking, and then some of them, it's a man, and then it becomes a woman in high heels, okay, to continue the image. Well, what would that keep becoming? According to this language, God. But it never fully becomes God, or never becomes God, because it's always in this process of becoming. But it's not a proximal kind of thing, okay? It's an ontological change, is what he's talking about. So, let him also come, top of 45, let him also come to be according to the likeness. What? For this, God gave the power. What's the power? This is what Calvin has such a problem with. Choice. Choice. Free will. See, the Calvinists really dislike another quote-unquote reformer from about the same time, a guy named Jacob Arminius. Okay? Because Arminius said, no, we have free will. We have free choice. We can choose. Calvin said, nope, you can't. If you follow God, it is only because God chose you. And Arminius said, no. But where Arminius went over, okay, where he went a little on, think of it as a pendulum swinging. Calvin's way over here. Arminius wasn't in the middle. Arminius was way over here. Arminius said, we can save essentially ourselves by our choices, by our will. Okay? And in doing so, he was following an old British heresy called Pelagianism. Okay? Look it up. Basil goes on.
How do you spell Pelagianism?
Pelagianism. From the person named Pelagius. Pelagius. Mm-hmm. Which was essentially Pelagius essentially taught, I gotta correct this now. According to St. Augustine, because we have very little of Pelagius's own writings that survive. And there are some who think Pelagius wasn't actually the heretic that St. Augustine made him out to be, and that he was essentially anathematized in one of the councils because of Augustine's words about him rather than his own words. According to Augustine, Pelagius taught that we can be saved completely through our own will, that we can find our way to God, and we don't really need Christ. That is, the death on the cross, we could kind of, figure our way out of. Okay? That's according to Augustine. It was partly in response to Pelagian or to Pelagius, that Augustine formulated the idea or the doctrine of original sin to show the human will is completely rotten. Okay? Which then Calvin picks up 1200 years later, etc. Okay, so God gives us this power to become like him, the power of choice. You can go. But now the one is given, the other is left incomplete. That is, the image is given at creation/birth. And what's the likeness like? Think of it this way. Think of the image as a ball of clay. So, at the creation of humanity, humanity is like a ball of clay. It's rational, however. It is a thinking ball of clay. But what does that ball of clay, according to Basil, need to do? It needs to shape itself according to the likeness of God. Now, if we're going to use anthropomorphic language, which we will, what does that mean? Well, it needs to have a head, it needs to have a body, it needs to have legs and arms and hands. Well, how does the ball of clay do that? By starting to, at the beginning, will, to choose. Okay? So what happens, let's use the Genesis account, back in the garden. According to the biblical account, how long after Adam and Eve are created do they sin? We don't know specifically, but it doesn't sound like it's years. It doesn't sound even like it's months. There are many writings, many fathers who say it's like the next day or within a few days.
Why do they think that?
It's in St. Ephraim the Syrian's Hymns on Paradise, and I don't remember. I'm drawing a blank. Basil is going to suggest later on in here that that Adam essentially falls, or Adam and Eve essentially fall, because they are satiated with the fullness of the garden. That is, it is such an amazing spread that they just get full. And in getting full, they forget about God. They live for the fullness that the garden provides rather than for the one who provided the garden. And in doing so, they forget about God. And when they eat of the fruit of the tree, it's because they've forgotten who they are, as it were. Okay? So, the one is given, the other is left incomplete. We are now the ball of clay. What? That you may complete yourself, become worthy of the recompense by God. What's the recompense? The reward, the payment. What is the recompense or the reward or the payment? What is it, according to St. Paul? Every person essentially wants to hear from God. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And you could, summarize that. Praise. Everyone wants praise. Or to put it another way, the way I often talk about it when I used to teach a fantasy literature course, everybody wants acceptance. They want to be accepted. But we often don't find acceptance. And what's worse is when we don't find acceptance in our homes, with our families. The one place where we ought to have complete, total, unconditional acceptance. Okay? And so people do things to what? To try to be accepted. Okay? They give in to peer pressure. Why? Because they want to be accepted. They want to be part of the in group, as it were. Well done, thou good and faithful servant, is being in the innermost of the in groups. Okay? So, how do we become according to the likeness? He then asks. Well, through the Gospels. What is Christianity? Likeness to God as far as is possible for human nature. That is, for human ontological being or essence. So what does that mean? Likeness to God as far as is humanly possible. If you are shown to be a Christian, hasten to become like God, put on Christ. Okay? Notice, all throughout here, he is never saying, and he will never say, because this would be a heresy of the major order, that we can become God in God's essence. What he's always going to say is we can become like God. How? In God's divine energies. And how God manifests himself to us and to the world. Well, what does that mean? Think of all of those quote-unquote classical Christian attributes of God. Love, truth, beauty, justice, holiness, compassion, kindness, all those things. We can become more and more and more and more like God in those. Okay? And I would even venture to say we can see some examples of individuals like that. Maybe not alive today, but I could think of one who died in, 17 years ago? Mother Teresa. I mean, if anybody was a quote-unquote saint and becoming more and more like God, she pretty much fits the bill. I mean, she goes and lives in the slums of Calcutta. She ministers to the poor, the needy, the sick, the dying, the people that most Indians would have nothing to do with. Why? Because they're the outcast. They are the lowest of the low. Okay? So, he goes on in section 18 and quotes again the passage, God made the human being according to his image. And then he says, well, it says the masculine human being. What about me? What about women? The man came to be, for it does not say the feminine human being, she says. And what she means there, what Basil is putting in the words of a female interlocutor, is she is saying, yeah, but in the Old Testament, in the biblical account, it uses a masculine word for the human being. It doesn't say a generic masculine and feminine. So, the woman also possesses creation according to the image of God, as indeed does the man. The natures are alike, notice, of equal honor. The man isn't above the woman. Okay? Notwithstanding what so many people will say. The virtues are equal. And what the virtues here means is the abilities to choose and do good as opposed to evil. It's not that women, medieval writers, Chaucer includes a lot of this in the Canterbury Tales. Medieval writers will often blame all the ills of the world on Eve and the women. If it weren't for people like Eve and Delilah and Bathsheba and, then the world would not be fallen or have problems. That's not the view of these fathers of the church. Not at all. That is a medieval corruption. Okay? So, the virtues are equal. The struggles equal. What does he mean by struggles? Yeah, he means the struggles to do what's right as opposed to, as Dumbledore will say in book 4, what's easy. Because all too often we're like electricity. man, we're going to take the path of least resistance. Okay? The judgment alike. Judgment. He means the ability to discern. So what has he said? It's the difference between male and female. Zip, zero, nada. They are equally alike in honor, virtue, struggle, judgment. Let her not say, I am weak. The weakness is in the flesh. In the soul is the power. And what does he mean? The weakness is in the flesh. He's acknowledging a physiological truth. Okay? Women, generally speaking, unless they're weightlifters, etc., are weaker than men. They have a lower muscle content, they have a higher fat content, and there are biological reasons for all of that. So, since indeed that which is according to God's image is of equal honor, let the virtue be of equal honor. What? By showing forth good works. He's saying, men and women, you both should show forth good works. There is no excuse for one who wishes to allege that the body is weak. And why is it simply delicate? But through compassion it is vigorous, in patient endurance, in earnest in vigils. And then notice what he does. Here he's going to elevate women over men. When has the nature of man been able to match the nature of woman in patiently passing through her own life? He is saying there, women have more patience than men. When has man been able to imitate the vigor of women in fastings, the love of toil and prayers, the abundance in tears, the readiness for good works? You need a quote-unquote biblical example? Who is at the foot of the cross? And Mary, the mother of Christ, Mary Magdalene, John, but it's primarily women. Who goes to the tomb the first morning? The women. Okay? And you see throughout the history of the early church, it's often the women, okay, who are kind of shouldering the load. You know, and really interesting, look at the history of Soviet Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church. Who was it who filled the churches that weren't destroyed? It wasn't men. Who was it who passed on the Russian Orthodox faith from generation to generation? It was the babushkas, the grandmothers, passing it on to their grandchildren, who then passed it on to their children and grandchildren. Okay? That's what Basil is getting at here. I have seen a woman secretly committing good thefts, doing good works apart from her husband for the sake of her husband, for the sake of the household's growth, for the sake of the children's long life. She gives and hides it from her husband's knowledge, distributing alms for his sake. That is, in his name. This treasure I'm giving to the poor, or this money I'm giving to the poor, is in the name of John, rather than Julia. Okay? Therefore, the end of that section, you have become like God through kindness. How else? Through endurance of evil. You know, what does Peter try to do when they come to arrest Jesus? Well, pulls out his sword. And Christ says, Peter, put it away, you know. If I wanted to, I could have legions of angels defend me. So, what does Christ do? He endures evil. Well, what does he say? Return not evil for evil. Okay? So, to go back to what Basil said earlier, to become a Christian is to become like Christ. So what does that mean? Endure evil. Without retaliating. Yep.
Okay, of
Caroline?
course, with the Old Testament, it's eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. How does that work? I know that that's the problem that a lot of people struggle with.
Christ came to fulfill the Old Testament.
So it's just over with.
Well, it's not that it's over with. It's complete. Okay.
So he was the eye for the eye and the tooth for the tooth.
He fulfilled every one of those Old Testament laws and Old Testament prophecies. Yeah. So when Christ says, for example, in Matthew 25, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. What is he saying? I am the least of these. So what does that mean? In the Old Testament, when a person caught in adultery was stoned. Stoned with stones, not stoned high. What does that mean? Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these. When you stoned that person caught in adultery, you stoned me. Okay? What happens with the woman caught in adultery who's brought to Christ? Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And they all, grumble and drop the rocks and walk away because they're like, damn it, I really wanted to do this. What does Christ say to the woman? Where are your accusers? They've left. I don't accuse you either. Go and sin no more. Okay? So what we see is if Christ is, as Paul says, all, in all, and the fulfillment of all, then that means every act of, let's say, judicial punishment is met in Christ. Okay? From a human standpoint. Every act of execution for rape, okay? Christ is the person being executed. Why? Because everyone is made in the image of Christ. And he is in all and fills all. Which is why he says, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me. So, inasmuch as you've returned evil for evil, you've done it to me. Or, the opposite of that, inasmuch as you've turned the other cheek to evil, you've turned the other cheek to me. Okay? Or, another way of putting that is, you did what I would have done. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. So, therefore you've become like God through kindness, through endurance of evil, through communion, through love for one another, and love for the brethren, being a hater of evil, dominating the passions of sin. What? That to you may belong the rule. Well, what's the rule? I don't think he's only talking about, know you not that you will judge angels and you will be rulers in heaven kind of language. He probably is suggesting that, Basil that is, alluding to the passages of the New Testament. But he's also going back to, what does it mean to be made in the image of God, to have rationality? And what does that mean then, to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth? To put the imprint of rule on the earth. So, if you become like God through kindness, through endurance of evil, through communion, through all these things, what? So that you may have the rule. In other words, it's these things that really give humanity the right to rule, to become more like God. Because how does God, quote unquote, rule the world? What does he tell his disciples? Not a sparrow falls that the Father is not aware of. I mean, if you think about that literally for a moment, you're driving down the road or you're walking down somewhere and you see a dead bird on the side of the street, or you see a dead possum that's been hit by a car, or a deer. And if you contemplate Christ's words, it means God is aware of that dead animal. And then Christ even says, what? Even the hairs of your head are numbered. So not one falls. A hair. How insignificant is that? It's pretty insignificant, but not to God. Why? Because God created every physical thing. Okay? So, and let them rule the fish, and let them rule the wild beasts. So now he's going to start reading that, and he starts to allegorize it. That is, the fish and the wild beasts aren't only real fish and wild beasts. Well, what beast do I have in myself? Because keep in mind, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to rule. How about anger is a little beast? When it barks in the heart, is it not wilder than every dog? Have you ever been so angry that you've literally been shaking? I came into one class, a long time ago, 17, 18 years ago. And I'd found out through a student that some students, this was a graduate course, some students were complaining about the course, not saying anything to me. They went to the department chair because they didn't like some of the things I was doing in the class. More specifically, some of the things I was saying in the class. Things that I was saying to kind of open their eyes to what the reality of life is like, from this standpoint, as a professor looking for a job, all that kind of stuff. Because they thought, oh, I'm going to get a graduate degree and I'm going to find a teaching job and life will be, bubbles and pink ponies and all those kind of stuff. And I was trying to disabuse them of that fantasy. And so I found out that the chair at the time had launched a quote unquote kind of a, what's the word I want? Surreptitious investigation. He'd started, inviting students into his office, asking questions unbeknownst to me entirely. And I went in that classroom that night and I was spitting nails, math, and I was just shaking like this. And I just, gave a real short little thing, said, if any of you have any problems with this class, you come see me. You don't go to the department chair, you don't go to the graduate director, you see me first, and then just left. And eyes got all big. And that's what he means. That barking anger. Okay? So, is not the deceit lurking in a deceitful soul harder to tame than every lurking bear? Is not hypocrisy a beast? Is the greedy person not a rapacious wolf? Have you truly become ruler of beasts? Top of the next page. If you rule those outside, but leave those within ungoverned. Well, what does he mean by leaving those within ungoverned? One of the things I hope you got from the Canon of St. Andrew, what's part of the purpose behind the Canon of St. Andrew and behind Great Lent? It's to rule those beasts. It's to tame those passions. It's to get the reason back in control of the bodily passions. Like wanting to eat more than is necessary, wanting to drink more than is necessary, wanting to sleep more than is necessary, wanting to go faster than is necessary. Okay? All those kinds of things. What is more dangerous than this? When a human being is ruled by passion, when anger pushes reason aside, not consenting to remain within, and takes upon itself governance of the soul. Well, we even have in judicial circles what? Crimes of passion. A man walks into his home or a woman walks into a home, finds her husband in bed with another woman, and kills him. Why? Because she was out of her mind with jealousy. Okay? If you watch, my wife and daughter, one of my daughters, just loved this show. Once Upon a Time on Sunday evenings. The Wicked Witch of the East or West, whichever she is. What happens to her when she really gets going? She turns green. Why? Because she's full of envy. The reason, the rationality are pushed down at that point. Okay? So, ruling the beast, he's saying, is talking about ruling the passions. You are indeed created ruler, ruler of passions, ruler of beasts, ruler of creeping things, ruler of winged creatures. Do not have airy thoughts, nor be light and unstable in mind. You were appointed to rule winged things. Go down to the next paragraph. Rule the thoughts in yourself, that you may become ruler of all beings. The word for thoughts in Greek is logismoi. or logismoi, Logismoi. Okay? And what the writers of the church, or these writers, will say, and you'll see this a lot when we get to the sayings of the Desert Fathers. The worst thing, really, that can plague us is thoughts. Thoughts. Not thoughts of a particular kind. Not thoughts of lust or thoughts of greed. It's thoughts. Because what do thoughts do? How many of you turn out your light at night and have that interior light turn on? And you just, you're lying there and your brain's just zipping 1,000,000 miles an hour and you cannot go to sleep. That's what he's talking about. Okay? Rule the thoughts. Why? That you may become ruler of all beings. If you can learn to control this, okay, and it's what Harry Potter, by the way, has to learn in book 6. Self-control. What does self-control mean? Control of the self, the interior self. Thus, the rule we've been given over the animals trains us to rule the things belonging to ourselves. If I can teach my dog to heel, my 120-pound lab that took out my daughter's knee, if I can teach that mindless dog to heel, then what else should I be able to do? To teach the mindless dog in here also to heel. Okay? And yet St. Paul says what? The things I wish to do, I don't do. And the things I don't wish to do, I do. And he says there's a war going on between the flesh and the spirit. Okay? That's the war. It's not a war that's won with one battle, St. Paul says. It's continual. It's what? Every day dying to self. Every day, Paul says, putting on Christ. That's what Basil is talking about. That growing into the likeness. Okay? So, go on to the next oration or discourse, whatever. On the origin of humanity, on the human being. So he says, section 2, at the end of that first paragraph. If you look toward our nature alone, it is nothing and is worthy of nothing. And what does he mean by our nature? Our pure physicality, our being made of stuff. He says, there's nothing great about that. Why? Because my nature is no different than this nature. Okay? My nature, the human genome, is really not that much different from the genomes of most other living things. Plants, flowers, sea life, etc. We share an awful lot. But if you look toward the honor with which he was honored, that is humanity. The human is great. Well, what's the honor? Turn over. How did God create light? Let there be light. It was a command. That's it. What about the firmament? Let the firmament come to be. Let the dry land appear. Okay? He did not say, let a human come to be. No. What did he say? That second paragraph on page 50. The Lord God took. Okay? What did he take? He took the dust of the earth and did what? Played with Play-Doh. He sat there, got it wet, molded it. Our body is quite worthy to be entirely molded by his own hands. The earth did not automatically cast us forth as it did the cicadas. Notice, he even understands about cicadas coming out, in different years. He did not tell the ministering angelic powers to make this or that, but by his own hands, as an artist, he took earth. When you focus on what is taken, what is the human being? When you understand the one doing the molding, the human is great. Indeed, he is nothing because of the material, and great through the honor. He's saying, yeah, modern science is right. Based on the material, we are the same as everything else. There's nothing special, nothing significant. But it's how, Basil says, the human being was created. By God taking with his own hands the matter and shaping it. And God took, and God made the human being. But here Scripture speaks anew of human creation. Okay? I want to skip on to page 51, the second paragraph under section 4. So, ponder how you were molded. The hand that received you is God's. May what is molded by God not be defiled by evil, not be altered by sin. May you not fall from the hand of God. And it's almost like he's implying God is still molding. God is still creating in a sense. And yet when sin happens, what does the thing being molded or created do? It falls out of the hands. Okay? You are a vessel divinely molded, having come into being from God. Glorify your Creator. For you came to be for the sake of no other thing except that you be an instrument fit for the glory of God. What does that mean? An instrument fit for the glory of God. He's not talking about an instrument fit to exalt the glory of God. He means an instrument fit to receive the glory of God. Okay? For you, this whole world is, as it were, a book that proclaims the glory of God, announcing through itself the hidden and invisible greatness of God to you who have a mind for the apprehension of truth. So he says, the whole world is what? Designed for you to know God. All right? Section 5. I'm trying to go through this one a little more quickly. Section 5. Third sentence. Well, second sentence. Growth is of two kinds, that of the body and that of the soul. This is on page 51. But growth of the soul is progress to perfection, what? Through things learned. In other words, learning your multiplication tables is actually a process of growth of the soul. Learning, dare I even say this, proper grammar is actually even growth of the soul. Okay? So grow is said to the irrational animals in regard to perfection of body. I guess in that sense my black lab is a little over perfect. In regard to the completion of nature. But to us, grow is said according to the inner human being. What? According to the progress which is growth into God. And into God, he means into the likeness of God. Does God know his multiplication tables? Obviously, yes. Does God know physics? Obviously, yes. So, growth in those intellectual endeavors is growth into the likeness of God. Let's see here. I want to skip some there. Page 53. I'm skipping a bunch. He talks about why lions are carnivores and why vultures, eat carcasses, etc. And he's going on and he's saying, nature was not divided, for it was in its prime. nor did hunters kill, for that was not yet the custom of human beings. He's talking about before the fall. For that was not yet the custom of human beings, nor did wild beasts claw prey, for they were not carnivores. In other words, in the garden, before the fall, lions ate grass. They didn't eat meat. Humans only ate what? The fruit of the garden. God said, you can eat of any growing thing or plant, but not the tree of in the midst of the garden. What happens after the flood? The ark settles, Noah comes out, and it's at that point God tells Noah, I give to you of everything that walks the face of the earth. Everything that moves, you can eat. That is, all plants, all animals. Well, obviously, except for humans. And he says, but there's one thing don't do. Don't eat of the life of the animal, meaning blood. So, you can eat steak, but don't drink the cow's blood. Okay, because the blood is equated with life. And only God can take life and such, in that sense. So nature was not divided, but all followed the diet of swans and all grazed the meadows. Okay. Section 7, page 54. But the restoration after the present age will be such as was the first creation. That is, when heaven and earth are made anew, what? We, humanity, won't eat steak. Lions won't eat cows. And the human being will come again to his original condition, rejecting evil, this life of many troubles, the soul's enslavement involving life's concerns. And I think what he means is by saying rejecting evil and then those following two phrases, the following two phrases are positives of evil. This life of many troubles. The soul's enslavement involving life's concerns. What does that mean? The soul's enslavement involving life's concerns. It means wondering, if you're poor, where am I going to get enough food to feed my family? How am I going to feed my children? Where are we going to take shelter when the storms come? It's caring for the things of this world. Okay? Putting aside all these things, he, humanity, will return to that life in paradise unenslaved to the passions of the flesh, that is, food, water, cold, shelter, unenslaved to the passions of the flesh, free, intimate with God, with the same way of life as the angels. Angels don't eat and drink. Notwithstanding Milton, angels don't have sex. Okay? As life was, that is, in the garden, it was without want of more. In other words, it was complete. It was perfect. Adam and Eve had everything. Okay, I'm going to skip a bunch again. Let's see. Skipping to section 11. Section 10, he's talking about the mystery of sevenness and the biblical number of 7 and how it resonates. And he talks about forgiving 7 times and 70 times 7 and all that kind of stuff. Section 11, and God rested from his works. There will be no more works of this kind, of this world in that day. And that day is referring back up to the paragraph above. The 8th day. Okay? Which means the day that never ends. Okay? Eternity. Life in heaven. After the second coming and judgment, etc. Okay? There will be no more works of this world in that day. Well, what does it mean, no more works? No more marriages, no more business dealings, no more agriculture. In other words, life then will be totally foreign to what we understand. There will be no more electricity. Why? Because there will be no need for it. Okay? The whole earth will be terrified. All the creation in turmoil, the sweat inconsolable, even the just in turmoil, regarding what lot then will be disclosed for them. He's talking about the day of judgment. Everybody's going to wonder, what's happening? What's going on? Okay? Where am I going? What am I doing? So he says, page 58, first full paragraph, accordingly, that 7 is prefigured by this 7. That is, the 7 later days, and God rested from all his works. The things of this life will no longer be in that day, the 8th day, the final everlasting day. The desires of youth have been stilled. There is no more proposal of marriage. Remember when the Sadducees came to Christ, they were going to try and trip him up, and they said, a man had 7 sons, and the eldest son married a woman, and then he died, and so she was given in marriage to the next son, and all the way down to the end, all 7 sons died, and then finally the woman died. Whose will she be in heaven? And Christ says, you don't understand the scripture. Okay? The desires of youth have been stilled. There is no more proposal of marriage, no more desire for procreation, regarding gold, no concern. Why is he addressing these issues? Because these are issues people confront here, now. You, the avaricious, you've forgotten your purse. That is, then you won't be avaricious. You'll have no purse. You, the property owner, have forgotten the land. You, mad for fame, have forgotten the glory. All those things have flown from the mind. They will all be gone. And the soul stands before the fearful one, before the expectation of impending terrors, for fear banishes every passionate thought that has gained citizenship in our souls. Where there is fear of God, all the stains of passion are driven out of our thoughts. So what's he saying? What's the beginning of wisdom according to the psalmist? The fear of the Lord. And what he is suggesting is, therefore, live every day. How? With fear of the Lord. He doesn't mean fear, oh, God's going to strike me down kind of fear. But he means fear of what will happen in that great day of judgment. Okay? Page 59. He's talking about, passions again. Are you violent, hot-tempered? Where does anger come to you? From disgrace? That is, somebody has slighted you or dissed you? What, you cannot listen to the disclosure of your lowly birth? Lower your glance and let anger cease for you. What does it mean, lower your glance? Yeah. Don't think you're way up here. Do what? Think of yourself lower. Humble yourself. See the earth and take it to heart. Meaning, see the earth and say, dust I am, and to dust I shall go. He said, I am lowly born, who have been born from the earth. Thus, the remembrance that we have come from earth never allows anger to awaken. If you think of that story that I told previously, which I think we'll see when we do the Desert Fathers, about the monk who tells the young novice monk to go yell at a corpse and to praise the corpse and then to damn the corpse. And both times he says, what did he say? He said, nothing. Goes, go and do likewise. That is, be like the dead man. Be like the earth. Does the earth rail against you? No. Does the earth think highly? No. So be like it. If you take to heart that you will be dissolved into earth, the madness of desire, what? Ceases. What kind of desire? All desire. The madness for the madness of desire for fame, the madness of desire for promotion, the madness of desire for a raise, the madness of desire for X, Y, or Z. Remember that in a little while, these limbs which now throb, or the present desire of the flesh, will not be, as the limbs are decomposed and dissolved into earth. Okay? So he says, remember what you come from. One last point in this oration, page 61. God created you upright. He gave the special structure to you as distinct from the rest of the animals. He means upright, walking on two legs. Well, chimps and gorillas walk on two legs. They don't. They do every now and then. How do they normally walk? You ever seen a chimp's or gorilla's knuckles? They're flattened out because they walk with their hands on the ground. Why? Why did God create us upright? Because the activity He intended to give you is also special. What's that activity? The human being no longer looks toward the stomach. That is, all these other animals walk with their face essentially toward the ground. Why? Because they graze. Basil says. The tiger, the lion, leopard, they were created to be grazing animals. So their face was turned towards the ground. Why? Because that's where they got their food. So they faced what their stomach was toward. But the human being no longer looks toward the stomach, but his head is lifted high toward things above, that he may look up to what is akin to him. Okay, according to the likeness. His eyes do not incline toward the ground. Therefore, do not make yourself go against nature. Don't focus on earthly things, but on heavenly things. There where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Okay, Christ says. Seek the things above where Christ is. He quotes Colossians. You were born, what? That you might see God. Not that your life might be dragged down on the earth. Not that you might have the pleasure of beasts, but that you might achieve heavenly citizenship. Okay? All right, I want to stop with that one. Go on to, we've got about 15 minutes left, 10 minutes left. Homily explaining that God is not the cause of evil. He starts off by talking about David in the Psalms. And he says, in Psalm 12, David writes, "How long, Lord, will you forget me to the end?" Through the whole psalm, he teaches us not to be downcast in afflictions, but to await the great goodness of God, to know that a certain providential ordering is granted to us through affliction, and that the amount of torment brought upon each is proportionate to the faith present in him. St. Paul says the same thing. You will never be tempted beyond what you are capable of withstanding. Okay? He then goes on, I'm skipping section 2 and go to section 3. This one thing must be held firmly in our mind, that since we are a creation of the good God and are welded together by him, I love that imagery, that we are welded together, arms welded to shoulders and such. As he manages smaller and greater things concerning us, neither can we undergo anything that is not God's will, nor do we truly suffer anything that is hurtful, unless it can be understood to bring us something better. For deaths are from God. Truly, not every death is evil, except if one speaks of the death of the sinner, since his departure, is the beginning of punishment in hell. So what does he mean? That we can undergo nothing that is not God's will, nor do we truly suffer anything that is hurtful, unless it can be understood to bring us something better. Boethius, in The Consolation of Philosophy, essentially argues everything that happens because of God's providence. This is God's ordering of the world. So when tornadoes come, it's not just a freak of nature. God is in the tornado, as Job testifies to. Okay? God is in the earthquake. God is in the tsunami. So that when, the big tsunami hit Sumatra 2004, major newspapers across America had headlines, where is God? Why does God allow this to happen? Okay? What's he saying here? What we call toilsome and painful, bottom of that page, painful to our sense perception, evil, bodily illness, blows to the bodies, etc., each of these is brought to us, why? For our advantage. Okay? What other writers of the church, and I think this goes back to St. Paul, will say is that everything that happens for one reason. It's necessary for my salvation. Okay, now you can get down in the nitty gritty. What does that mean? It means my wife being diagnosed with cancer was necessary for her salvation. It was necessary to what? Reorient the mind. Okay? Or somebody losing a child, or somebody being in a car accident. That's pretty hard medicine to swallow. He sends illness, top of 68. He sends illness to those for whom it is more profitable to have their limbs constrained than to move unhindered toward sinning. Ouch. Okay, now keep in mind, this guy's a bishop. He has regular dealings with people. He was also a monk. He also founded hospitals. Okay? Basil was one of those. He was one of the founders of monasticism. But he said, monks shouldn't just be out in the desert by themselves. They should live in communities, and those communities should be close to towns and cities. Why? So that they can be an aid. In fact, he suggested monasteries ought to open hospitals for the ill and sick, and the monks should minister to the ill and sick. Okay? And he's just said, well, if you're sick, it's because God wants to stop you from sinning. He's not saying you're sick because you're a sinner. He's not saying this is God's judgment. Okay? It's preventive medicine, as it were. Okay, I'm going to skip a bunch again. Page 70, because we are quickly running out of time. Last paragraph, about the little over the middle of the paragraph. Therefore, the flesh is struck that the soul may be healed, and sin is put to death that justice may be made alive. There's really nothing better for the mind/soul than to be confined to bed for a while, to where you have to really start to think about some things, or to be told you're really sick. John Donne used an illness in 1623 that he thought he was dying from and composed a series of meditations called Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions that are among his best-known writings. It's from those that we get the phrase, ask not for whom the bells toll. It tolls for thee. Okay? Talking about remembrance of death and such. Page 71, third of the way down. Raisings of cities, earthquakes and floods, destructions of armies, shipwreck, every occasion when many people are killed, either by earth or by sea or by air or fire or by whatever cause, these happen for the correction of the survivors, as collective wickedness is corrected by a public flogging from God. Well, what's he mean? He seems to be saying there, earthquakes happen to places that have gone a little wrong. So sin is evil in the proper sense, and it is especially worthy of the name of evil. Sin, evil, is brought about by our free choice, since it is up to us either to abstain from vice or to be wicked. See, he's essentially saying what Athanasius essentially said also. Evil doesn't come from God. Evil is the privation or negation of good. Where does evil come from? Choice. Pure and simple. Choice. Even the angelic orders were created completely with free choice. They could choose to worship God or they could choose not to. Some chose not to. So, bottom of 72. Stop being displeased with divine providence. In short, do not maintain that God is the cause of evil's existence, nor imagine evil to have a subsistence of its own. For wickedness does not subsist as if it were a living being, nor do we hold that its essence coexists in another subsistence. Evil is a privation of good. Human sexual intercourse is a good thing. Rape is bad, is evil. You can't have rape without the other. That is, you've got to have the first thing that's good in order for it to get twisted and torn. Okay? Eating is good. Being a glutton is not. Why? Because it's the twisting of the original positive desire. Okay? Evil is not in itself in existence, but arises following the maiming of the soul. Go down to the bottom of that paragraph. Yet indeed, evil exists, and its activity shows that it is greatly poured forth in all of life. How does it exist? In choice and action. From what source then does it exist? One asks, if it is neither without origin nor created. Go to the bottom, last sentence of that last paragraph. God created the body, but not illness. And likewise, God created the soul, but not sin. The soul is made evil through a perversion of what is according to nature. A perversion. Okay? So what was the good set before the soul? It was the attentiveness to God and union with Him through love. That's why Adam and Eve were made. To be attentive to God and to seek union with Him through love. And what happened? They no longer attended to God. They hear the serpent speak, and they attend to the voice of someone else. Okay, we'll stop there. On Thursday, I just want to finish this oration. So we'll take a few minutes to finish it, and then we'll go on to the beginning of St. Maximus the Confessor.